It's after midnight on June 23, 1993, in Manassas, Virginia. The streets are quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes in a small town on a summer night, and street lamps glow faintly yellow with the buzz of cicadas lingering in the air. And through the thin walls of an apartment building, life is unfolding in ways no one could imagine. Inside, a young woman lies in bed. Her body is tense, her face streaked with tears. She stares at the ceiling in silence while just inches away, her husband sleeps deeply, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. To him, the night is over, but for her, it has just begun. Moments earlier, she says he forced himself on her again. And as she lies there staring into the dark, the years of humiliation, fear, and pain settle heavy on her chest. Her name is Lorena. In minutes, she will take action that will shock the world and dominate headlines and make her the subject of ridicule, fascination, and debate for decades to come. She gets out of bed slowly, bare feet hitting the floor. The carpet is rough under her toes. She walks into the kitchen, each step trembling. She pulls open a drawer. The refrigerator hums softly, a steady, indifferent sound, and her hand closes around the handle of a weapon. She stares at the reflection in the window and sees herself, but her eyes are red and her face is unfamiliar. She turns, walks back to the bedroom, and with one swift, irreversible motion, she does the unthinkable. John screams. Blood is rushing and the sheets are soaked. Lorena bolts. Weapon in hand, she runs down the stairs into the night. She climbs into the car and drives. The headlights blur as tears cloud her vision. She panicked, lost. At one point, she rolls down the window and throws the organ into a field. And hours later, she will call the police and tell them where to find it. And by sunrise, the name Lorena Bobbitt is everywhere. Welcome to GBRLIFE Transmissions. I'm your host, Caitlin, and you're listening to GBRLIFE of Crimes, where we explore not just what happened in crimes committed by women, but why they happened and the psychology behind them. Today, we're talking about Lorena Bobbitt, the woman whose name became tabloid fodder and the subject of late-night jokes. She was the punchline for a decade, but beneath the laughter was a story of control, of fear, of abuse, and of survival. Lorena Gallo was born in Bucay, Ecuador, in 1969. She grew up in a modest Catholic household, the eldest of 3 children. Her father was a dental technician, and her mother stayed home with the children. It was not a family of wealth, but of expectations. In Lorena's world, obedience mattered, appearances mattered, and she was taught to serve, to respect authority, and to keep family honor intact. And like many eldest daughters, she carried a quiet weight, the unspoken pressure to be responsible, to succeed, and to carry herself in a way that would make her family proud. Her childhood wasn't full of crime or rebellion. Instead, it was marked by the ordinary sacrifices of a working-class family in South America. The Catholic Church was central to her upbringing. Sundays meant Mass. Confession was expected. The teaching of obedience and forgiveness swept into her understanding of what it meant to be a woman. Forgive, endure, sacrifice. But Lorena also dreamed. She loved American movies. The glamorous couples, the suburban houses with manicured lawns, the cars gleaming in the driveways. America to Lorena wasn't just another country. It was possibility. It was escape. It was everything her modest life could never give her. When she was 16, she had the chance to go. She traveled to Virginia to study English and live with relatives. For a young girl from Ecuador, America was dazzling. The highways stretched for miles, malls stood like palaces of glass and steel, and even ordinary neighborhoods looked like the movie sets. But America was also intimidating. She spoke English haltingly, and her accent marked her as an outsider. She was small, shy, easily overlooked, and vulnerable. And that vulnerability mattered because it shaped who she trusted, who she clung to, and what she believed about safety. At 18, she met John Wayne Bobbitt. He was 22, a U.S. Marine. And to Lorraine, he looked like the embodiment of the dream she had carried since she was a child. He was tall and confident, and above all, he wore the uniform. That uniform was everything: strength, stability, patriotism. The protector she had been taught to seek. They met at a Marine ball. The lights glittered, the music swelled, and John smiled at her, twirled her on the dance floor, and for a moment, Lorena felt like she was living inside of one of the movies that she adored. She was chosen. And for the shy immigrant girl from Ecuador, this was intoxicating. The romance moved fast. John courted her, swept her off her feet, and within a year they were married. She was 20. He bought her ticket to belonging, to security, to the life that she always wanted. And she carried flowers down the aisle believing she found safety, but safety was never what she got. At first, their marriage looked like a dream. They lived together in Virginia, surrounded by John's military community. And Lorena worked as a manicurist. They were young, attractive, and seemingly happy. But beneath the surface, trouble was already brewing. Lorena would later testify that John drank heavily. He flirted openly with other women. He was quick to anger, and the first slap shocked her. But then came the apology, the promise it would never happen again. Victims of abuse often describe this cycle, this violence followed by contrition, the temporary peace that feels like love, until the cycle begins again. The slaps become shoves. The shoves become nights of screaming, slamming doors, and bruises that she tried to cover with makeup. He controlled the money. He demanded her body when she didn't want to provide her body. And she said no. He didn't care. She cried. He laughed. He would force me, she told the jury years later. I cried, but he didn't care. Neighbors remembered the shouting through the thin walls, and police were called more than once, but nothing came of it. In the early 1990s, domestic disputes were often dismissed. Officers recalled arriving to find John standing in the doorway, confident, charming, and Lorena hovered behind him, eyes red and too afraid to speak. She looked terrified, one officer later said, but the reports went nowhere. And at work, Lorena's coworkers noticed her hands trembling as she painted nails. She showed up with bruises shaped like handprints, and her eyes were swollen from crying. Sometimes she whispered to them about John, and sometimes she said nothing at all. Silence was part of the abuse. Psychologists call this the cage. Battered woman syndrome is a form of PTSD. Victims live in cycles of hope and despair. Each apology reignites hope, and each assault crushes it. Over time, the cage becomes invisible, but inescapable. The victims begin to believe that escape is impossible. And by 1993, Lorena was suffocating inside that cage. And then came the night when it all collapsed. The crime itself was shocking, but what came after was even more surreal. John was rushed to the hospital. Surgeons worked frantically to reattach his organs. One particular organ. And against all odds, they succeeded. The detail was irresistible to the media. And by morning, Lorena's act was international news. The story wasn't told as one of abuse or trauma. It was told as comedy. Late-night hosts were cracking jokes night after night. Headlines screamed, Lorena Bobbitt became a punchline. But inside the courtroom, another story emerged. John was tried first for marital SA. He denied everything, and the jury acquitted him. And then came Lorena's trial for malicious wounding, and she faced up to 20 years in prison. The trial was broadcast around the world. Reporters filled every seat, and satellite trucks crowded the courthouse lawn. The public devoured every detail. And Lorena, she sat small and nervous at the defense table. Her voice was soft, accented, trembling, and she told the jury about years of abuse, about being SA'd, about being humiliated. He would force me, she said. I said no. He didn't care. The prosecution argued she acted out of jealousy, out of anger, and out of revenge. They showed the weapon. They described the mutilation. And they told the jury Lorena had been lucid enough to drive, to hide evidence, and to call the police. They said she knew exactly what she was doing. The defense painted another picture. They brought psychologists to the stand, and experts explained battered woman syndrome. They described how trauma corrodes rational thought, how fear warps the brain. One testified, she was not calculating, she was desperate. That night, she snapped. The jury listened, and in the end, they sided with Lorena. She was found not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. Instead of prison, she spent 45 days in psychiatric hospital before being released. And after the trial, their lives diverged dramatically. John leaned into his notoriety. He starred in films. You know, those kinds of films, the kinds that children should never watch. And he gave interviews. He tried to monetize his infamy, but Lorena disappeared. She remarried, and she had a daughter. Years later, she returned to the public eye, but not as a punchline, as an advocate. She founded a nonprofit for survivors of domestic violence, and she used her voice to help others. And so we ask, who was the real criminal? Was it Lorena who committed an act of violence so shocking it burned into our collective memory? Was it John, the man she said abused her? Or was it the society around them, the neighbors who ignored the screams, the police who dismissed her calls, the culture that laughed at her pain instead of listening? Psychologically, Lorena's story fits the pattern of abuse. She endured all of that until she broke. Her act was not cold-blooded revenge, but clear desperation. But culturally, America failed her. We didn't want to hear about domestic violence. We wanted a headline. We wanted a joke. And maybe that's the true tragedy of Lorena Bobbitt's story, that her act became unforgettable, but her suffering was forgotten. This has been GBRLIFE of Crimes, part of GBRLIFE Transmissions. I'm Caitlin, reminding you that understanding the darkness helps us appreciate the light. Join me next time as we uncover another case that challenges everything we thought we knew about the criminal mind.